Hey everyone, Misfit here ahead of the episode. Just wanted to give a few notes before we start. In Brenna's story, she discusses a plantation owner in the 1800s. This story is in no way to glorify, romanticize, or fetishize American slavery or excuse it. Slavery and everything around it was a horrific crime against humanity. I believe it's a pretty uncontroversial stance to say that we oppose and reject it in any way that it exists historically or presently. Secondly, we use the term pygmy to refer to the enslaved group. We don't intend it as a slur or a pejorative. Due to the folklore nature of the story, many of the details of the story have been lost to the time. Whether or not they were from the mbenga, batwa, or any of the other groups that are associated with that term by the racist colonizers who kidnapped those people and sold them off as novelties. To this day, these groups suffer systematic discrimination. They're often evicted from their land and given the lowest paying jobs. At a state level, they're not considered citizens by a lot of African states and are refused identification cards, deeds to land, healthcare, or education access. This population is rapidly decreasing as poverty, intermarriage with other rival groups, westernization, deforestation gradually destroy their way of life and culture. They, like many other groups out there, are just victims of the after effects of Western colonialism. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Kinda Fruity podcast, or should I say kinda spooky, because this will be our Halloween special. I am Brenna. I am here with the ever illustrious, and I don't have any other kind words to say.
I'm Misfit. I am definitely a misfit.
Yes, definitely.
So hey, I hope y'all have got some fun plans for Halloween this year. It'll be the first major one that the pandemic is under control enough to where people can go out and trick-or-treat. Like in 2020, obviously nobody could go out and do that because it was still going on. 2021, a lot of people did start going out, but this will probably be the first one in a couple of years where a lot of people can actually get out there and have some fun in their costumes. I've already got one kind of picked out that I'm going to wear to work.
I've got a nice outfit that I plan on wearing for Halloween, at least.
Yeah.
Just in case we have trick-or-treaters, though I'm pretty sure we don't have any, candy.
I mean, in the 3 years that we've lived here, we've had 0 trick-or-treaters, which almost makes sense because, like, big apartment complex, but at the same time, when I was growing up, the big apartment complex is the place you want to hit exactly because everyone there had candy and everyone was afraid to go there. And you could get so much candy in so little time because all those tiny apartments all in one spot. Perfection.
Yeah. Well, today's episode is going to be a little bit different, or tonight's, depending on when this is viewed. Because instead of doing our usual discussions, we have something different in mind.
Yeah.
Do you wanna let them know what we have in mind today?
So Brenna's got a bit of a story for everybody. So real quick on that, there's of course a lot of stuff in the news right now, and once it gets closer to actually Halloween, spoiler alert, we're recording on a different day. Halloween, the fun news that always comes out is the stuff about, people putting stuff in candy or, like, putting drug edibles in candy. First off, no one's trying to give their $20 edibles to your kids. They don't care about your kids that much. As for the, classic razor blades and an apple. First off, what asshole in the year of our Lord 2022 is giving out apples? When I was growing up, the places that gave out fruit were the ones that we all talked about and knew to avoid, especially those that were giving out the most evil of evil, sugar-free candy.
I never got fruit the few times I ever trick-or-treated growing up. I did, however, kick a guy in a scarecrow costume and take all of take the whole candy bowl. But that's only because it was that prank that people still try to do to this day where, the guy's in the costume sitting on the porch looking like just a Halloween decoration, and it has like the take one on the thing, and as soon as you go to grab it, the dude jumps up and scares you Well, dude jumped up, scared me, and got a little leg where it didn't belong, and his entire candy bowl stolen. And surprisingly, I got to keep it because his wife came out. I remember this. His wife came out and was like, "Sweetheart, I told you one of these days you were going to do that prank, and some kid was going to literally give you what for and have a fight response rather than a flight response." And the dude was laughing so hard that he was like, "I'm not even mad. She deserves to just have the candy. We've got more candy in there." So I ended up with a whole bowl full of candy and a story to tell. But that's not the story that I plan to tell today.
So speaking on Halloween for just a second, what kind of costumes did you used to wear? Because for me and my brother when we were growing up, like, it was almost a meme that the poor kid would end up going out in like a white bed sheet and they'd be going as a ghost, right? That's literally what was our costume for a couple of years. We weren't exactly poor, it's just back then ghosts were kind of spooky and kind of cool. But then naturally, as we grew up and started learning things, I realized, hey, you know what? Dressing up in white sheets and knocking on people's door late at night, probably not great. Probably not great.
Probably not. But as far as costumes are concerned, growing up, because I lived with my mother, her and her spouse were, I guess you want to call societal people. They always needed to look like they had more money than they actually had. So for things like Halloween, you know, we actually went to Walmart, and me and my stepbrother would pick out costumes. Well, I wasn't your typical little girl. Like, I'm pretty sure there was at least one year that I dressed up as a fairy or something. But that was one that I was coerced into wearing. But let me think. I think that was the year that I kicked that guy. I was dressed up as a fairy while my stepbrother was dressed up as Jar Jar Binks.
Oh no.
Yeah, that was a thing. He was only dressed up as Jar Jar Binks for like 30 minutes, and then the rubber head came off because it was too fucking hot and he couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
So he had normal human head for the rest of the night getting candy, and he was just dressed in similar clothing to what Jar Jar wore in the movies. But I have been primarily, I was a cat one year. I was a dog another year. Which, the dog costume, I will say this right now, was literally just a recycled cat costume. And what I did was I put an old pair of socks over the cat ears and dyed them and colored them with a marker to have spots on them to make them look like floppy dog ears.
So you knew you were a furry from a young age.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a vampire too, and the year I was a vampire was the year that my stepbrother was trying to show me how the grease paint worked. It was horrible. I was flaking before 30 minutes was over. Like, I had white flake skin, which I guess made me look a little more scary, I suppose. I don't know. I did always want to actually have a werewolf costume, but every year I was denied this, so I just stuck with what I had. Also, I did repurpose my dog costume another time to be a mouse one year. The only reason for the animals, though, is literally because that was the only thing I could get my family to agree on for, like, school-based costumes. The costumes that I would go to school in were the animal ones. The ones that I wore actually trick-or-treating was the vampires, the fairy that one year, and stuff like that. Heck, I remember one year stealing my stepbrother's Darth Vader mask just so I could go around using the voice morpher behind it.
Yeah, that was pretty much kind of like one of the rules that my school had, is that you could come in costume on Halloween. The only rules were basically like no blood, no props, no fake gore, or nothing violent. So, eventually, you didn't even see really vampires or anything like that. It was like, just sort of, you were either going as like a ghost, or as some sort of cutesy kind of character. Like, we actually had people wearing Barney costumes for Halloween, which, like, not knocking Barney, Homeboy's OG, but not exactly spooky. But we also had people dress up like Pokemon, because that was also becoming super popular back then.
Yeah.
But hey, speaking of stories...
Well, since we're going to get into that, speaking of stories, like he said, I will not say where I got this story from. I will not be inclined, so don't ask. This is a story that sort of has been passed down, is all I'll say. Which I know that's like, oh, you just told us where you got it from. Not really. No, I didn't. But I guess to start, I should set the scene. You see, this story is through multiple ages, but the one we will start with is the beginning. Back in, well, to be vague, back in the era of plantation owners is where we will begin. Back in this time, everybody knows the story, everybody knows the history, so we're not going to get into that. But there was a man who lived at the top of a hill in an area called Icy Cove. And in Icy Cove, he had a plantation. But this man was different. He didn't want your typical slaves. Instead, he decided what he wanted was a little bit more exotic. And that exoticness came in the form of a little race of people commonly referred to as pygmies. Why the name pygmy? I'm not sure. I know what pygmy animals are, but I couldn't tell you the reason why the race of people was called this. Now, these individuals were taken, like every other slave story. These people were taken as an entire tribe, their chief included, to be forced to work the fields for this man. Now, this man had an illustrious building, a beautiful house that I have been told is comparable to the house from Gone with the Wind at the end of the film. I've never seen this film, but I'm sure it paints those who have a pretty decent picture. Well, like some of the darker stories of plantation life, this man decided to get it on with the pygmy women. Unfortunately, this resulted in every single one of them, including the chief's daughter's, demise, because the big man and little woman do not mix. Or at least, that's how the story goes. Upon their death, the chief and his people decided that what's yours is now mine. And late one night, while the man was sleeping peacefully, not thinking anything of the death of every female, which obviously it wasn't every female, just the ones he decided he liked. Because of this, he had, for some reason, no inclination or self-preservation to realize that perhaps he did something wrong. For as the story goes, the pygmy chief and some of his men snuck in and murdered him, making sure to let anyone know that this house and all of its belongings, this land, was theirs. They painted the walls with his blood to signify this. Now, in saying that story, we go to the next part of it. That is just a, what you call it, expositional piece of the puzzle. For what happens next may not seem spooky to you, and this entire story may not seem scary to you, but somebody lived this. Years later, a man and his wife decided to move onto a piece of land not too far from that old house and plantation. This was the time where you could still have what is called squatters' rights. And at some point on living upon the land, the man indeed get the deed for the land as a squatter. His wife and him had many kids, many boys, and a few girls. Well, one day the husband managed to let the wife know that should she go picking for firewood, or wood in general, to always stay close to the edge of the woods, close to the house, and to never venture further or too further within, for that land is not theirs. And he went to work. Many times the man reminded his wife that she was not to venture too far within the woods when looking for wood, for that was not their land, and they should not mess with it, though she never asked why. Of course, this was also during the time where women often didn't ask why. This is probably one of those times where the woman should have. One day, the man went to work after saying his explicit warning once more, to which she waved him off, getting a bit tired of the repetition, and took 2 of her eldest sons with her. The third eldest son had to stay and watch the other children. Well, her and her 2 boys ventured into the forest to find some wood. At one point, after some time had passed and she was not having any luck finding good pieces of wood, she ventured further and further, until one of her sons reminded her that, "Father doesn't want us to go this far, Mom." To which she shushed him and said, "What your father doesn't know won't hurt him." So they ventured further and further still. At some point, the boys had meandered back a bit because they did not wish to disobey their father. But they also did not wish to go too far from their mother should she need them. At this point, the woman heard a small voice, calm, yet authoritative, speak up in the trees. "Go back. These trees are not yours." She looked up and could not, for the life of her, find the source of the voice, until her eyes landed on what looked to be a little boy, who remarkably looked like her youngest. But that's impossible. For one, the youngest child hadn't really learned much how to utter much words, let alone full sentences such as that. Nor was he that good at walking. But it still baffled the woman at how closely, at least from her perspective, this boy looked like her son. So it had to be them playing a prank on her, right? She hollered and told him to get his butt back into the house. She'd deal with him when she got home. To which what looked to be a young boy disappeared into the bushes. She scoffed and continued on her way, going further and further still into the wood, to where even she was beginning to wonder and worry that perhaps she had gone too far. When, once again, the voice piped up. "Leave. These are not your woods, and this is not your land. Go, and we will forgive you." Once again she looked everywhere for the voice, and once again her eyes landed upon what looked to be a young boy, the same one that remarkably looked like her youngest son. This time she was already frightened and had had enough and was frustrated. So she yelled and told the boy, "Now you listen here, young man. When your father gets home, you are getting a beating. I promise you that. And your siblings are too for helping you do this. I don't know what's come over you." But this time, the boy did not leave and just stared at her. And in doing so, allowed the woman a much clearer view of this child. And she came to realize slowly and slowly that this was not her son. There were too many inconsistencies with his appearance. A boy that looked like a young child, but only in height alone. She thought she was seeing things, but so frightened, she did listen this time. She dropped the wood that she had been holding and ran back to the house with her 2 sons in tow. And once she got back to the house, she asked them, all of her children, "Did the youngest leave?" To which they all responded, "No, mother. He's been here all day. Are you all right? You look pale as a ghost. Perhaps you need to lie down and rest." To which she agreed, and let the eldest take care of the youngest, as she sat down and tried to calm her jittering nerves. The husband came home and took one good look at her, and simply said, "You went into the woods where you weren't supposed to and met them, didn't you?" To which she asked for an explanation. And an explanation is what she got. One that all of her children heard, and one they all remember. Now, years passed, and a young boy and his brother decided that they would go camping on that old hill in Icy Cove with their cousin who swears he feared nothing. Together they went, like they always did. And like they always did, they planned, of course, to be young teenagers of their era. Sneak some booze that they had an older friend purchase for them, so they could have a nice camping trip underneath the stars, telling ghost stories, so close to a certain house. They all knew the way, for they had been shown it at least once or twice, and memorized the ways, but time has a funny way of changing the landscape. It was much more treacherous to get up that hill. Snake pits had formed, with snakes at the bottom, living peaceful, snaky lives. Well, at least until disturbed by one bumbling teenager or another falling in, or sticking their leg too far in just to see how far it goes, or whether or not a snake was actually down there. We all know the type. But onward they went, thinking nothing of it. And so the story of the pygmy house was told amongst them, remembering and reminiscing how they themselves had been told the story. Which is one of the many reasons why they picked that spot, because it was so close to the house that through the trees they could see the porch. It wouldn't take much for any one of them to simply climb the small porch steps and enter that old building. A lot more dilapidated now, but still quite beautiful, still quite brilliant and rich looking. They bet any piece that they could find inside that house would be worth more than anything. Almost priceless heirlooms must hide within. So they talked and talked until finally, to prove that he was in fact had no fear, the cousin decided, you know what? I'll go inside and I'll take something, since you two are too scared. And in he rushed without a second's hesitation. And he grabbed something from within barely a moment of opening the door. Now, what he grabbed was a beautiful and expensive, but dusty and old pocket watch that still had its chain attached to it. He pocketed it and went outside to rejoin his cousins. The young boy and his brother begged and pleaded with their cousin to please tell them what it was that he took, though fearful of perhaps the repercussions, as what if the pygmies were still alive? What if they still were hiding in these woods after so many years? But none of them believed any of them could still be alive around this place. Certainly not. It had been years since anyone had even heard of such a thing. Well, their plans for a nice campout was unfortunately cut short, as they had no choice but to flee back into their houses as rain began to pour, and they bid each other adieu. But as the cousin went down, he noticed a sound of a second set of footprints behind him. He ignored it and continued on. Reaching the house, he called out to his father and explained that rain had stopped their fun, to which the man just simply responded in kind with, "Well, sometimes it rains, sometimes it pours, you know." The young man said, "Yeah, I know, Pops. I'm gonna go turn in, though." So he went into his bedroom to take a better look at that nice little pocket watch he'd snatched. But as he did, he noticed a pair of eyes coming in through his window. These eyes were staring at him. But how could that be? While his window wasn't too high up off the ground, considering what looked like a child's face pressed against the window, a child with that stature could not possibly be standing there. It would at least take two, standing one upon the shoulder of the other, and children that size definitely did not have that great a balance to do such a feat. But that's when he remembered the story of the pygmies. Could this be them? Though he feared no one, a little bit of fear of something must have got into the boy. For, without another second's hesitation, he grabbed the pocket watch, put it in his pocket, put on his coat, and when his father called out to him, he simply said, "Forgot something," and ran out the door, back all the way, up the hill, hearing that second, and now a third set of footprint going behind him, slapping in the mud as the rain poured down. He went back, he put back what he took, and upon returning back to his home, he noticed the quiet and silence, and only his own footfalls could he hear. The next day, his cousins were eagerly awaiting him to show off the pocket watch that he had pocketed the night previous, but unfortunately he had to tell them, "I took it back." Now, if you were to go and search for the pygmy house, you will not find it. For many years, up until the 2000s, had passed, and mysteriously, a incident of arson happened in those woods. No one ever was found to do it, or no one ever really cared to find the arsonist, as the only real thing affected by the fire was what looked to be a house once situated, hiding in the woods, and nothing else. Thank you for listening to this story, and I hope you have a very happy Halloween.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Happy Halloween, and for those of you that celebrate it, Blessed Samhain.